So it's about time for us to get started if we can get Glenn to sit down. He can't hear nothing. I'm glad to be here this morning, and I hope you are too. Glad to see each one of you. Our lesson today is Exodus chapters 13 to 15. And there's a lot in those three chapters. Before we start reading in chapter 13, I want to go back to chapter 12. I've been over this several times, and now I don't remember why. But in chapter 12, verse 40, tells us that the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. There is significance to that number, but I can't explain what it is. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day, it came to pass that all the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. All the host of God. Yes. All the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So it was 430 years to the day. Now the first portion of their sojourning or living in Egypt was, I think, very pleasant, because when Joseph brought his father and his brothers down, they gave them the choicest land in Egypt for what they wanted to use it for. It was fertile, good for crops, and good for cattle, and that's what they had, was cattle. So it started off good, but it didn't last long. Now they're about to leave Egypt, and in chapter 13 we read, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine." Those three words at the end of that verse, it is mine. Doesn't that sound rather definite? God said, the firstborn is mine. He said, sanctify them. Sanctify means to dedicate, consecrate, set apart for God. All of the firstborn. But then, and I'm really not sure I know what I'm talking about, but I get the idea that this is suggestion of the firstborn being a sacrifice to God. Well, in verse 13, he says, all the firstborn of man among thy children thou shalt redeem. So he didn't intend for the firstborn to be offered as a sacrifice on the altar and killed. But remember what it says in Romans chapter 12? We are to present our bodies a live offering. It says a living sacrifice, a live offering to God. And that's a pretty good deal, is it not? Jesus died for us so that we could live for him. Is that a problem? Well, it is for most of us. So many of us want to live for self, but Christ died for us. It's only right, it's only fair, since he died for us, that we live for him. All right, he goes on in the next few verses and establishes the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And I think the reason for the unleavened bread was, of course, when they left in a hurry when they left Egypt. They packed up all their pots and pans and everything, and they had their bread dough with them, and these people ate a lot of bread. But they didn't have time to knead it, K-N-E-A-D, work it up. So they left. Well, of course, they were eating unleavened bread the night before. When they sacrificed the Passover lamb, they ate unleavened bread. And there's something about leaven which seems to be a type of sin. So he said, leave this leaven out. So he established that. And in verse 14, he says, talking about the offering of the firstborn and the redeeming he says in verse 13 that if you've got a donkey, that's not a clean animal. It's not suitable for sacrifice, but you need to redeem that with a lamb. And if you refuse to do that, break the neck of the donkey. In other words, kill it anyway. No one will get benefit from this animal if you don't redeem it. And verse 14 he says, "And it shall be when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, What is this? That thou shalt say unto him, By strength of hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. And it came to pass when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that the Lord slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all that openeth the matrix, being males, but all the firstborn of my children I redeem." He says, teach your children the mighty wonders of God, His protection, His providence. And I like what God said about old Abraham over in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verse 19. He said, "For I know him," speaking of Abraham, "that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment." The only person responsible for training, educating, and raising your children is you. You and your spouse. It's not the church's responsibility, although the church has a lot of responsibility. It's not the public school's responsibility. It's the parents' responsibility to teach their children. Now, verse 17 has an interesting note in it. He said, "And it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, Lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt." God knew what He was doing, and there was a highway well used that would lead right up to where they were going. But He didn't lead them through that because He knew His people. He knew that these people, actually this generation, had never known anything but slavery. They had never known anything but to serve with rigor. Now that rigor, it means to break you. They worked as hard as they could work, even to the point of damaging their own health. But they were forced to do this. Well, they were demoralized. They did not know how to think for themselves. Now, their grandparents may have for a while, but when you serve as a slave that long, you lose the ability to think for yourself. All you do is what you're told to do, right? That's these people. And God said, I know when they see the Philistines in battle array, it'll scare them to death, and they'll turn around and go back to Egypt. And that's not the plan. The plan is to go to Canaan. In verse 19, we read about Joseph. "And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones away hence with you." Does it matter where you are buried? To the deceased, it makes no difference whatsoever, does it? I knew a lady 45 years ago who was 90 or 91 years old, a widow, and she still had a job. And she prepared supper for her daughter and son-in-law who lived next door every day. She sold cemetery plots. And she said she was talking to this man one time about buying a plot. He said, I don't need that. They can just throw me over in the ditch. She said, that won't work. You'll stink. Well, you know, America has laws about the deceased. You can't just throw them in a ditch. You got to properly take care of them. But what I'm trying to say is, I don't know why this was important to Joseph, But it was, and I'm beginning to think that perhaps, it said in Genesis chapter 50 that they embalmed the body of Joseph and placed it in a coffin in Egypt. I just kind of think that maybe that coffin was placed in a public place where the Israelites would see that from time to time, and they would be reminded that God has said he will surely, or Joseph said he will surely visit his people and take them back to the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their children. So it was a lesson for Israel. Now, move down to chapter 14, verse 20. And they took their journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud and led them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Now, I meant to say this to begin with, but the title of this lesson today is Freedom to Follow, and that's a good and noble title for this lesson, but I've changed it. My title is, If God Sends You Out, He Will Go With You. Now, I'm sure some point in your life, you have sent people out for you, whether on the job or for personal reasons. You send someone to do something for you or to go to some place on your behalf for some reason. Well, why would you go with them? If I sent one of my sons out to do something, why would I go with him? If he's going to do the job or he's going to make the trip, why do I need to go? Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? But that's not the way it is with God. He set up this pillar of fire and pillar of cloud to lead them, and this was a visible evidence of God's continued presence with them. You can't see a spirit. God is spirit. But his presence was made evident to them in this pillar of cloud and pillar of fire. The book of Hebrews 13:4 says, to be content with such things as you have. Do you know anybody who is content with such things as they have? God said, be content with such things as you have, because I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Isn't that good to know? Now, the Israelites did not have the Holy Spirit dwelling in their heart as God's people today have. So we can feel the Lord in our heart, can we not? We can feel and understand his moving in our heart. And we are expected, and hopefully we will yield to his leadership. But they didn't have that. They had the pillar of fire and pillar of cloud. Now then, chapter 14, look at verse 5. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? Pharaoh and his servants, I don't know how to put this. They didn't have positive, good feelings toward Israel. They were just slaves. But you think about now, the 10 plagues have taken place, and it has, to me, I would say it has totally devastated Egypt. You know, the hail, the locusts, and all this stuff just ruined everything, killed so much. But the people of Israel were the economic backbone of the entire country. So they woke up after they had left and said, what have we done? We have cut off the hand that feeds us, so to speak. So at one point, when Israel went to the Egyptians and borrowed stuff, the King James says, it means ask for stuff. And it says that the Israelites found favor in the heart of the Egyptians, and they gave them everything. So whatever was left after the plagues generally was given to the Israelites when they got ready to leave. So Egypt was in poverty, real poverty, upon the leaving of the Israelites. So the roles are sort of reversed. Now, verse 6, and he, who is speaking of Pharaoh, he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over every one of them. I've read commentators that says Egypt did not have a cavalry. Cavalry are mounted soldiers, usually mounted on horses, but I think that's a mistake. I think later on in this chapter it tells us that he speaks of horsemen and chariots. Anyway, verse 8, and the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel, and the children of Israel went out with a high hand. You got a picture of that? A high hand simply means with courage, bravery, and triumph. It was a big deal. Now, verse 9. And the Egyptians pursued after them, and the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, encamping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth and Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid, and the children of Israel cried unto the Lord. Several years ago, we used to drive a highway somewhere down in southwest Arkansas, and I don't remember where it was, but I remember there's a certain place on this road, I think it's headed west, that you could look forward, look down the highway, and it was kind of a rolling hills, and it went up. And you could see way over yonder where the road went through the woods, you know, that little, like a gun sight. Well, I clocked that one time, and it was 12 miles. That's a long ways for a highway to run straight, isn't it? I'm thinking this is sort of what the Israelites saw when they looked back up the hill. You know, they went to the Red Sea. That's where they are now, camped by the Red Sea. Water is always in the lowest portion of the terrain, isn't it? So there may have been a 12-mile hill behind them. I don't know. But at least it was such that they could look back and see the army of Egypt pursuing them. And it scared them to death. And it says the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. Crying out to the Lord gives the impression of request. What's that word I'm looking for? I mean, it's intense. If that's not the word, but they were in distress. They cried out to the Lord, and I wonder if they cried out to the Lord in faith. I wonder if maybe they just cried out and complained to the Lord. However, look at the next verse. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. That attitude is not the attitude of everybody, but this is the attitude they had. Remember, they'd been slaves all their life. This generation knew nothing but slavery. Everything they did was for the master. The master provided their basic needs, and all they did was for the master. So they were demoralized. Now, I remember the year 1775. Can you go that far back? But I have recently found a few more words to these words that I'm thinking about that were spoken by Patrick Henry in 1775. You know, it was pretty close to war with Great Britain because they refused to give these colonists the freedom that they wanted. And he addresses a group of statesmen at a convention, and he says, "Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war is actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it not, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Now, these old slaves, that's not a very nice way to put it, is it? They didn't have that attitude. They said, what does it say here? Because there were no graves in Egypt, has that taken us out here? They tell me that Egypt had set aside 3/4 of their land for the purpose of cemeteries. I really don't understand that. And like I said earlier, I really don't understand why it's so important to be buried in a particular place. But it is important for those who are left when we leave this earth. So they felt like it was better to die in Egypt and be buried in a cemetery than to be killed in the wilderness and their bodies left unburied. Patrick Henry didn't have that idea, and I'm glad that he didn't, and those others who went along with that attitude. So what they're saying is, are there no graves in Egypt? When they say, are there no graves in Egypt, they're saying, was there not room enough there to bury us? Now, this attitude is totally different from the attitude of King David. I say King David, when I think of David, the son of Jesse, I think of this little shepherd boy. He was nothing but a shepherd boy, and he became king because God appointed him and anointed him king. He says in Psalm 27, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked, even mine enemies and my foes, came upon me to eat up my flesh, they stumbled and fell. Though an host should encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war should rise against me, in this will I be confident." Totally opposite attitude that the people of Israel had. But it can be sort of understood because of their life up to this point, which was lived in slavery. Okay, we have Moses' response to their complaining and their murmuring. And Moses said unto the people, "Fear ye not. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will show to you today. For the Egyptians whom ye have seen today, ye shall see them again no more forever. For the Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace." The Lord shall fight for you. And they said, you don't have to do anything. Just stand still. Stand still and pay attention to what God will do. Have we ever got that message personally? Do we understand that? Stand still and let God do his work. Well, in verse 15 we find Moses had cried to the Lord, and the Lord said unto Moses, "Wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward." There is a time to pray, and there's a time to take action. Lamentations Chapter 3, verse 26, Jeremiah, by inspiration of God, says, "It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord." Well, Israel didn't know that. They didn't understand that at this time. In the same chapter, No, in Ecclesiastes. It says, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. And he goes on and on about a time for this, a time for that. And he says that he hath made everything beautiful in his time. So God is saying to Moses here, shut up and go to work. He's saying, you've prayed. The time now is to get up and go forward, move forward. So he says, lift up thy rod and stretch out thine hand over the sea and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. To me, it's important to note that the word, he uses the word that they are to go on dry ground. Have you ever seen a stream that stops flowing? The bed of that stream doesn't dry up overnight. It's mushy, marshy, muddy for a long, long time. But they went over on dry ground. Let's read on. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall follow them, and I will get me honor upon Pharaoh. Pharaoh was an unwilling participant in God's plan. He didn't know God. He didn't seem to want to know God, but God used him anyway. Isn't it much better to be willing to be used of the Lord rather than use you like he used Pharaoh against his will? And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. So the reason for all this is so that the Egyptians will know that God is the one true God. When I have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots and upon his horsemen. We need to move on a little more quickly. He tells us in verse 21 that the Lord caused a great east wind to come up, and it divided the waters of the Red Sea. And I don't know how wide the sea was at this point. I can remember looking across the Mississippi River when it was a mile wide, and that's a long ways across that water. But I got an idea that this Red Sea was probably between 3 and 10 miles wide. I don't know how deep it was, but God opened up the way. He parted the waters, and the waters were a wall on each side of them, and the sea floor was just like an interstate highway, I think. It was pavement, smooth, so that they could go across. Now then, let's see. Verse 22, and the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on the right hand and on the left, and the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses and his chariots and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch, they tell me that's somewhere between 2 and 6 a.m., that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. From what I've read, these chariots had 2 men in each one of them, one captain and one sergeant. One drove the chariot and the other did the fighting. And they were pulled by 6 horses. I don't know why they would need 6 horses for each chariot. But there was a lot of horses, a lot of chariots, and it also says horsemen. As they pursued them, it says he troubled the host of the Egyptians. You know what he's saying here, what this means? They went into a panic. Now, I suppose I've been panicked, but it's been so long I don't remember it. But you know what that means. I mean, you just get frustrated, excited, upset, anxious, terrible state of being because you don't know which way to go or what to do. They were panicked when their wheels fell off. Now, these were probably the best vehicles on earth at that time. But they drove them so fast and furiously that the wheel, God took the wheels off of them. And they panicked and they said, let's get out of here. The Lord fighteth for Israel against us. They finally got the picture, but it was too late. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. And the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and the waters returned, and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after him. There remained not so much as one of them. I don't know how many of these there were. But when God does something, he does it completely. He said there remained not one of them. So Israel saw the salvation of the Lord that day. And in verse 29 to 31, we have something of a summary of what just went on. Let's read that. But the children of Israel walked upon dry ground in the midst of the sea. That's the third time in this chapter it says dry land or dry ground. And the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the seashore. Now then, the result of all of this is the desired result. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Finally, they really, how long does that last? We don't have time to read all this, but in the next chapter we find Moses becomes the song leader. He led in, you know, when you have real joy, do you want to sing? Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people do. Just sing for joy. I used to sing every morning when my wife went for a walk. She didn't want to hear me. But I got a lot out of it. I got something out of it physically. Singing is good for the body, but it's good for the soul also. You ever feel this joy in your heart and think about the song, Jesus Saves? There's power in the blood. When we all get to heaven, I love to tell the story. Rock of Ages, it is well with my soul. We can sing those songs with feeling, and I think God is honored when we do. So Moses and Miriam and all the others were involved in singing praises to God, thanksgiving to God, because of the joy in their heart for how God had taken care of them. Now then, in chapter 15, verses 22 through 27, I'm not going to read that, but you've read it. Briefly, it says that they went to this place after 3 days without water. And they tell me that a human cannot live more than 3 days without water. You know, all my life, I've always preferred a liquid to drink that had a little more flavor to it than water. But there's nothing better for the body than water. They came to this place, didn't have any water, and they went to the Lord, and the Lord said, take this tree over here and throw it in the water. Can you see old Moses picking up that tree and throwing it in the water? I believe he did. I don't know how big it was, but this water this tree turned the bitter waters of Marah into sweet water so they could drink and get their fill. God again, by miraculous means, took care of Israel. If God be for us, who can be against us? I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Now, the word Marah means bitter. Do you remember Ruth and Naomi? Naomi left her home and went, I forget where it was, but to a foreign country, went out of state. And while she was there, her sons grew up and got married and died, and her husband died, and she came back home. And she got back home and she said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore. Not Naomi, which means pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because she said the Lord has dealt bitterly with me." Anyhow, they go on, and after that drinking that bitter water that was turned sweet, to a place, to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the waters. Can you imagine the joy of approaching this oasis where they had all the water they could drink and plenty of shade to go with it? I say plenty of shade. 70 palm trees, I'm sure it was great. But if you got 2 or 3 million people and their herds and their flocks and their stuff, but it was great to be there, very refreshing. Well, I want to close just by repeating what I said earlier. If God sends you out and you're a child of His, you're a servant of His, if He sends you out, He will go with you. And we need to keep that in mind. Wherever we go, we take the Lord with us. So we need to be careful where we go. Remember that little song? Be careful, little feet, where you go. Good to remember that. God goes with us everywhere we go. All right. Thank you very much for your kind attention this morning. As far as announcements are concerned, we will meet again here, same time, same station, next Sunday. Are you looking forward to that already? We will meet again on Wednesday night for Bible study. Next Sunday, same time. And next Sunday after the services, there will be a meeting for all those who are interested in working or helping in Children's Chapel. And the grounds committee will meet. Anything else we need to mention at this point as far as announcements are concerned?
Is this meeting today, and Evan Castleberry will be married
Today. Evan Castleberry will get married this afternoon, and after services today, we will have our regular monthly business meeting. Do you have prayer requests you'd like to make known at this time?